Okay, do they have, the government's never really given us a cost of this bill. Do you ever hear any figures?
Yeah. No, so the prorogation controversy of a few years ago was about the government refusing to provide those figures, and they won't. I mean, so a big problem here. So under the Constitution, we have, in fact, prior to the Charter, the main function of the Constitution was to divide up powers of government. So some powers go to the province, some go to the federal government, and then the province further devolves some things to cities. So let's take just simple marijuana prohibition. The police are paid primarily by cities, unless there are RCMP, and then they're paid partially, depending on the size of the city, by the federal government or the province. So that's already bloody complicated.
Yeah.
When the prosecutors are paid by the federal government, but the judge typically is paid for by the province, and if the sentence is less than 2 years, which all the mandatory minimums in C10 were, that then goes to a provincial jail. So you end up with costs being split in this system between all three levels of government. So the federal conservatives probably don't even know how much this is going to cost is the really scary thing, because they only pay a small amount, and the provinces are all different. We've got different arrest rates all across Canada. In fact, most people might be surprised to know British Columbia has this reputation as being incredibly lax on marijuana. In fact, we have 10%, maybe 15% of the country's population, and we have 33% of marijuana possession arrests. We have far less of a percent of marijuana production arrests. So it's not as if, more people are growing it in BC, so that's why more people are getting arrested for possession. No, it's actually the case that people in BC are much more likely to get arrested for possession. And it isn't in downtown Vancouver, I can tell you. It's out in rural areas. So we have this massive discrepancy in the application of the law, and that combined with the jurisdictional quagmire we're in, it's incredibly difficult to say what this costs. That's also why there's not very many good studies on how much prohibition in general costs independent of
C10. Two more questions on the bill C10 there. Who serves more time in jail? Somebody who grows 6 marijuana plants or somebody who molests a child?
Well, under the mandatory minimums, it's the marijuana plants. Although, I mean, while that's a heinous section, obviously, I think it's important to note that someone who grows 6 marijuana plants is very much unlikely to get more than the minimum. Someone who molests a child is probably not just going to get the minimum. Yeah. But it does speak to the irrationality of the bill when a mandatory minimum is higher for 6 plants than it is for sexual molestation.
Big time, for sure. And will Canada ever privatize prisons? What do you think?
Yeah.
That was quick and easy.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
okay.
Really understand the issues of it, and I think the government, given the chance, will absolutely hand out private prison contracts. We already have privatized a lot of services in prison.
Correct. Yeah, we do. Because there was somebody who commented to me the other day, like they've closed Kingston, or they're closing Kingston, they're closing another jail, and now they're double bunking. So they're creating a problem which they are looking at to use to go to this route of privatization by saying we can't afford to build these new jails, so let's privatize, so a company will go ahead and do it, and secretly we'll not let anybody know that they have to be 90% full.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're doing with double bunking is twofold. It's, as you say, they're making the false case that they can't afford to pay for jails, but they're also making jails more violent, which makes the public more interested in jailing more people. If you just have a bunch of kind of passive marijuana people in jail and no reports of violence and no reports of issues, the public doesn't hear about it. But if you ask the average person what happens when you go to jail in the U.S., the first thing they're going to say is probably rape, which means the public has this understanding that in the United States, jail equals violence equals scary, which I might add it does. This year, for the first time, the number of sexual assaults against men outpaced women for the first time, I think, in history, largely due to jail. But what they're doing is creating the conditions for violence that will make it easier for them to sell these so-called tough on crime policies.
Correct. Back to the medical marijuana program. I don't know how much or how you were involved at all with the Owen Smith case.
Well, I'm not involved. I mean, Kirk Tusaw, who I work with at Beyond Prohibition, is the attorney on that. I've sent out press releases for them, and I've read the decision, but I'm not formally involved with it.
Formally involved with it at all. Yeah, because I know there's some people wondered about, is it only BC related? Oh, just for the people who don't know what the Owen Smith case is, what that was about was he was working at a compassion center, and he was producing edibles, baked goods and stuff, and he got arrested for it, went to court, and they were able to prove that these edibles are beneficial to the clients and stuff. So he won part of the case that says that the government is wrong by not allowing edibles to be used by patients, but part of the case is still before the courts where it's more directly related to him.
So what the case basically found is that currently the medical marijuana access regulations specify whole plant cannabis. What the court found was that only exempting whole plant cannabis was an overreach and therefore unconstitutional, but also found that Owen Smith broke the law because he was selling these products. So it's kind of an interesting one where part of the law is kind of unconstitutional, but he still has to go to trial over the other parts of the law he's breaking. But it's important for medical users to understand it's not just medical, it's also derivatives that are covered under that decision. So for instance, you can now, if you're in British Columbia, you can legally carry both cookies and hashish.
Just in British Columbia.
Currently, just in British Columbia. That's right.
British Columbia. But could a court here or any other province turn around and point to the BC case and say, hey, this is what's going on in the BC Superior Court. This is what they've ruled. Is there something there that can be looked at in order to cover people in other provinces?
Yeah, so what it's called legally is persuasive. So a judge in another province could look at that and say, well, I agree with this interpretation, but they're not compelled to. So it's not precedent. For people who are old enough to remember the Summer of Legalization tour arose when Hitzig, 2003, so when Hitzig struck down the entirety of the CDSA only in Ontario, and then courts in Quebec and British Columbia were persuaded by that case and found that the law did not apply in those provinces. However, concurrent to that, courts in, I believe it was Alberta and Nova Scotia, were not persuaded. So it really, again, kind of the theme of all this is that the law is applied very differently across this country, and especially my coworkers there. So if you're in one of the three the biggest provinces, you're going to get a very different, and depending where in those provinces you are, application than you will in others.
That's right. Does anybody have any questions for Jacob? Yep, hang on, here we got one. I'm going to take the mic here.
Hey Jacob, it's Jenny. I don't know. Is this working? Yeah? Thanks for the amazing interview. I mean, as someone that's feeling pretty burnt out in the activist community, it's encouraging to hear a strong voice like yours, so appreciate you being here for the interview. I'm wondering if you have any advice, like, as far as, I mean, I guess not even mobilizing, but actual, like, protesting at this point, where is best to do that? Like, the MP here, I feel like, is totally Dean Del Mastro.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had one protest for Bill S10 at his office. He knew that we were going to be there. He wouldn't even come and talk to me, sort of thing. Do you think it's better to protest individual cases out front of the courthouse and get them in the paper, or to I feel like there's no reasoning with Dean Del Mastro, but I'm just wondering what the best avenue for my efforts is at this point.
Well, thank you for the question, and it's Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a tough one, and I can tell you, I don't know what the necessarily the best answer is, but I'll certainly give you where Cole Seguin and I kind of went with this. The Conservatives have a small base that actually is energized when we protest. They don't. It's not like on the left where politicians generally, if they're protested against, their support actually diminishes. With us, it actually goes up. So what we've spent a lot of our time doing is actually working within political parties, building alliances and building networks, and also working with other nonprofits that are kind of also interested in getting rid of the Harper government. So whether that's in the environmental movement, or that's in the social justice movement, it definitely means a lot less insofar as kind of direct action protesting. But really where we're at least to my mind, is that we need to be building capacity for the next election so that we're as strong as possible when we can defeat Stephen Harper, rather than expending a lot of energy on fighting what's ultimately a losing battle in the interim. And I know that can be quite disheartening, and we've had definitely, I mean, we've seen across Canada a downturn in a lot of the activism that's going on simply because of this. But, you know, just know that we have had out here, and so I'll give you an example. With me, Adam Greenblatt in Montreal, it's an amazing success getting involved with the NDP, NPD for any Quebecois that are watching, as well as a municipal political party there. There's so much you can do, and there's so much they can use your energy to their benefit. And at the same time, let's face it, I mean, all politics is back scratching. So you gain favors from them by helping them, and the same goes for nonprofit groups. So I have not organized a protest in BC for quite some time, just because I don't see the point. I mean, we can go to an NDP office and make a big show out front and say, well, we like these guys, but the Conservatives suck. Or we go to a Conservative office and they lock the doors or close it down for the day. Yeah.
What my dad did here was he was running for the Green Party, but he essentially stepped down and said, if you were going to vote for me, vote for the Liberal candidate instead. Do you think, like, is that starting to happen around sort of, and maybe that has the capacity to change things a bit for us?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it's important for people to remember 60% of voters in this country did not vote for Stephen Harper. And further, only about 60% of people even voted. So the majority of Canadians never voted for Harper. If we can get the NDP and the Liberals to ideally work together to some degree, or just not work against each other in losing ridings, I mean, you know, what's the point of the Liberals taking a few thousand votes from the NDP or vice versa in a riding where it could mean a Conservative gets elected where they wouldn't otherwise? And I think ultimately the more we can do to kind of enable, if not full-on cooperation, then at least non-competition, I think the better off we are in the battle to beat Stephen Harper.
And, like, if you look at the gay and lesbian and, like, the civil rights movement and everything, it was that sort of, like, the rights. Yeah, but it was sort of the rights frame that mobilized people. Do you think, like, is that what's happening in this movement, or, like, is that what needs to happen in your mind?
Well, I mean, I think that I think that is definitely part of it. And, you know, you look at especially the gay and lesbian community, but also, I mean, the African American civil rights movement in the United States, it really was crafting a rights-based message, obviously, publicly, but also creating within political parties with, you know, enough political capital to move on these issues. And so I think it's both. It's difficult, I think, for the average person who might support us to accept that you have a right to smoke marijuana without a medical reason. So I think that maybe a rights discourse on recreational use may be counterproductive. It probably is counterproductive. That being said, on medical, I think the rights discourse is incredibly successful. You know, 90% of Canadians support a right to medical marijuana. On the recreational use, I think that the more valuable discourse is simply that prohibition isn't working. It's enriching gangs. I mean, we all know the talking points on that, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess for everyone in this room, like, if we want to make a difference, volunteering with the political parties that oppose the Conservatives is our best chance.
Yeah. Look at the last election, find out which between the Liberals, the NDP, or the Greens got the most votes in the last election, and go to one of their meetings. Find out what they're about. You know, you'd be surprised at how much support there is on the grassroots level for this kind of support.